Not too long from now, somebody will work out how to capture in VR what my eyes are actually seeing. I want to cry, and not just because I'm sat on my nuts. Crystal Super on max resolution, Foveated region super sampled to 150%, every setting on maximum, 80 frames per second on the ground, 90 frames per second the rest of the time, and not a single stutter. Hello wingmen. Today I'll show you how to set up a digital combat simulator for your Crystal Super and your OG Crystal, how to optimize your settings for your GPU, along with a few other tips and tricks, including those pesky spotting dots that will enable you to get the most out of the game. I mean simulator. Unlike the relatively calm experience that is Microsoft Flight Simulator, there can be times in DCS where you go from feeling somewhat relaxed while conducting a routine mission to 30 seconds later breaking your neck to tally the bandit who's crept up on your 6, and you're pivoting your head left and right like you're a 5-year-old being offered a plate of vegetables. Other times, you might find yourself on the deck of a busy carrier and DCS is doing everything it can to ruin your visual experience. Yo-yoing up and down in frame rate leads to noticeable stutter, so we'll aim to keep your FPS stable and above 60 frames per second. Fear not, fellow wingmen. I'm going to cash in some of that passion and support and show you how to take the train from Slideshowville to optical nirvana. Fellow wingmen, you may be shocked to discover that around 90% of the people watching this video are not subscribers. Hitting the subscribe button costs you nothing except for the painful exertion of a single click, but really helps me continue to make content that matters to you. So please go ahead and hit the subscribe button along with like if you're in the mood. I have to assume that your CPU and RAM is sensibly matched to your GPU, such that your system isn't acting as a significant bottleneck to your GPU. So this is how we'll proceed. Firstly, resist your ADD and take a look at this chart. What it illustrates is what your GPU should be able to achieve if you used the 5090 settings I will show you first for both the Super and the OG Crystals. Remember that the Crystal Super has 29 million pixels, that's 3.5 times more than a 4K monitor. Even the OG Crystal rocks 16.6 million pixels, which is nothing to shake a stick at. Some GPUs simply do not have the rasterization performance nor the VRAM to drive beasts like these. So we may have to scale the render resolution in Pimax Play and modify some quality settings in DCS if you're running Tier 2 or Tier 3 GPUs. If you got sold a bill of goods by your favorite GPU influencer and you didn't like this GPU chart, please feel free to correct me in the comments below. Also, please remember which tier your GPU is in, and we'll do our best to ensure that you always stay above 60 frames per second in VR when in Flight Simulator. The first thing we'll want to do is set up Pimax Play's assets such that you can take advantage of per game settings within Pimax Play. You may note that when you click on My Assets in Pimax Play, DCS will be missing if you're using the standalone version. To fix this, in the top right corner of Pimax Play, click Import and then go to the drive and folder you installed DCS to. The standalone version typically resides in Program Files, Eagle Dynamics, DCSWorld, and Bin, and there you will find DCS.exe. Now in your assets you'll have a game called DCS with an ugly looking icon. We don't like that, so we're going to fix that too. Close Pimax Play and ensure that it's completely closed in the sys tray. Then navigate to C, Users, Your Username, App Data, Roaming, Pimax Client, and then right-click on config.json and edit with Notepad. Scroll down to the bottom of the file and you'll see product name :DCS, and in between the quotes behind image, paste the following address. Don't worry, I've included this code snippet in the description below. What this does is use the DCS icon asset from the Steam store instead of that generic icon. Save the file and restart Pimax Play. Now in My Assets, you'll see that it is named correctly and you have a more appropriate looking icon. After connecting your Crystal Super or OG Crystal, go into Device Settings. Leave the headset refresh rate at 50 Hz, and if you are using the Super, knock the brightness down to 99. This can help eliminate some of the washout that some people find unnatural in DCS. However, I don't have an issue with it, as I find the high brightness of the Super's panels to be more true to life in flight. It's bright up there, and there's a reason pilots wear shades. Ensure eye tracking is on and calibrated, and I recommend that you turn off Auto IPD and just enter it manually. Under Games, you'll find that you now have a DCS option. Enable the per program setting. Ensure that Pimax XR QuadViews is unchecked and Pimax Central Priority Rendering is unchecked also. For a Tier 1 and Tier 2 GPU, you'll want to leave the render resolution on high, i.e. 100%. For a Tier 3 GPU, you'll want to customize the render quality and reduce it to 75%. Remember that due to the high pixel density of the Super, you're still going to get the advantage of clear image even when turning down the render quality. Pimax Play doesn't always auto-detect when DCS is being run, so it's a good practice to launch DCS directly from Pimax Play so that it applies the per game settings that you've just set. The next thing we're going to do only applies to NVIDIA RTX 3000 series cards and above. We're going to force DCS to use the latest DLAA transform profile, which performs extremely well in DCS. In the description below, you'll find a link to DLSS Swapper. This excellent utility permits you to modify the DLSS version that is used as a default in compatible games. Go to the library section and make sure that you download the latest available version. Then in the Games library, select DCS and then click on DLSS and swap the current version of the latest version from the list. You'll note that DCS now has an updated version of DLSS. In the description below, there is a link to NVIDIA ProfileInspector. Open it and navigate down the profiles in the top left until you find DCS.exe. If it doesn't exist, search for Digital Combat Simulator Black Shark. Then under DLSS overrides, check SR Latest DLL to On and SR Preset to Preset K. Click Apply Changes. If you did find DCS.exe, navigate down to Digital Combat Simulator Black Shark and then under DLSS overrides, check SR Latest DLL to On and SR Preset to Preset K and click Apply Changes. The most recent update of DCS appeared to have the latest DLSS 4 DLL included in the package. However, there is a way to ensure that Profile K is always enforced. Under C, Users, Your Username, Saved Games, DCS, Config, look for a file called AUTOEXEC.cfg. If it doesn't exist, then right-click in the folder and create a new notepad file and call it AUTOEXEC.cfg. Right-click on this file and edit it with Notepad. Inside, write the following line: DLSS underscore preset equals K. I have added these code snippets in the video description below. If you find later on that you're getting blooming, blurriness, or artifacts in your HUD or MFDs, then you can also add the following line to this file: HUD underscore MFD underscore after underscore DLSS equals true. This will force DCS to render the head-up display and the multifunction displays after DLAA has been processed. Using the links in the description below, install Embucha's QuadViews Foveated and TallyMouse's QuadViews Companion. These are preferred over the QuadViews built into Pimax Play because Pimax Play's version does not offer an explanation of what the settings mean and do not offer much customization. If you have OpenXR Toolkit, open it and uncheck DCS. Then open QuadViews Companion, and for the OG Crystal I would choose TM's Favorite. If you have a Tier 1 or Tier 2 GPU. If you have a Tier 3 GPU, you may need to drop the Foveate resolution to 100%. Because the Super's FOV is so much larger than the OG Crystals, the Foveate region doesn't need to be as large a percentage of the screen as with the OG, so reduce horizontal to 20% and vertical to 25%. Foveate resolution can be reduced to 150% because the Super already has such a high pixel density. Super sampling the Foveate region is much more efficient than applying MSAA over the whole display, especially when you're not looking directly at most of the display anyway. Whenever you update Pimax Play, it has the annoying habit of disabling Embucha's QuadViews OpenXR layer, so one tool I highly recommend is OpenXR Layers, link in the description below. It permits you to check which layers are actually enabled and if there are any issues with the order that the layers have been installed. Next, under NVIDIA's control panel's Manage 3D Settings, click on Image Scaling and set Sharpen to 20%. Yes, I know that some of you will say that GPU scaling isn't available in VR, however, that's not what we're doing. We're just using NVIDIA's image sharpening because it really makes distant details pop out in VR in DCS, rather than the horizon looking a little blurry. In many respects, the results looks a little like Almalance's digital lens applet that was being demoed last year. Now for all GPUs, one thing that I find breaks immersion is poor shadows in the cockpit. I find having details of your panel being illuminated with crappy shadows just ruins the experience. For me, the 1 to 2 FPS that you may lose having 8K shadows projected in your cockpit is well worth it. Here's how you can push the shadows to a higher quality than is available by default in DCS. Navigate to your DCS install folder. Under Config and Effects, you'll find Shadows.Lua. You'll find a Nevada section and a default section. This is because the Nevada map looked a bit rubbish with shadow map sizes of 1024. Also, these settings have not been updated in DCS for a long time, so they are a little outdated with respect to both VR headsets and GPU technology. You'll also note that Ultra here is not a setting available in DCS, so we're going to change High to 8192, Medium to 4096, and keep Low at 2048. High to 8192, Medium to 4096, and keep Low at 2048. Remember to save the file. Improved spotting dots has been the bane of the DCS community since they were devised. The issue simply was this: if you had a low resolution monitor, then you couldn't tally a bandit until it was close by, due to the lack of pixels. If you had a high resolution monitor, you had, in Eagle Dynamics eyes, an unfair advantage because aircraft further away could still be spotted due to having more pixels. So they came up with a scheme whereby if you were operating at a low resolution, distant aircraft would look like large blobs, and if you were at high resolution, they would end up as a single pixel. This effect only comes into force once the lowest level of detail 3D model has been reached at the render limit. Unfortunately, this would be like making your enemy wear poorly prescribed corrective lenses prior to an engagement because you have poor eyesight and you think it's an unfair advantage with their 20/20 vision. What they should have done was realize that the angular size of the aircraft at a distance is what matters, regardless of what your resolution is. Of course, with QuadViews, you have both a high resolution display in the direction you're looking and a low resolution display in your periphery. This results in distant aircraft turning into annoyingly large blobs when they move into your periphery. In the settings, we can change how this behaves, choosing Off, Auto, 1 pixel or 2 pixels. We've already seen auto, so this is what 2 pixels looks like. If you look closely, you'll see it's the same problem. However, if you turn it off altogether, the transition between foveated and peripheral is uninterrupted, and this is much better. Remember that we set our foveate resolution to be 150% over the already amazing 100% of the Crystal Super, or 175% of the OG Crystal's 100%. So we will be able to spot very far out without the issue of the better spotting algorithm. If you remember the AUTOEXEC file from earlier, we can permanently disable the better spots by adding the line .RendererExperiment equals false. It's interesting to note that the devs also regarded this as an experiment, otherwise why not call it .RenderFix? Now we can go back into My Assets in Pimax Play and DCS from there. In the loading screen for DCS, we can do everything we need. Go to Settings. For resolution of cockpit displays, choose 1024. Anti-aliasing we've already set, though for a non-NVIDIA GPU you will need to choose MSAA. Under upscaling, leave as is for NVIDIA, choose FSR for AMD, and NIS if you're a comedian. DLSS performance, quality for a tier 1, balanced for a tier 2 and performance for a tier 3. Textures high for tier 1, medium for tier 2 and 3. Same for terrain textures, and the same again for shadows. However, try leaving them on high initially to see how you like the new cockpit shadows. For a tier 1 GPU, you can max out all of the quality factors, and I would always set preload radius to be at least 80,000. For tier 2, drop these values to around 50%, and for tier 3, down to around 25 or 0% to ensure that you can maintain frames. I would recommend visible range to be ultra for all GPUs. For tier 1, clouds to ultra, for tier 2, high, and for tier 3, medium. For anything other than tier 1, turn SSAO and SSLR off. Ensure lens effects is off as it causes issues with QuadViews. Very importantly, set your max FPS to the same as your headset refresh rate. There's no point setting the main render thread to chase frames that cannot be displayed anyway. This is one of the main points to eliminate stuttering. Never use motion blur in VR nor depth of field. In the VR section, ensure that pixel density is set to 1.0 and no higher. With the Quest 3, for example, you need to set the pixel density higher than 1 to achieve crisper images, but that is not necessary with the Crystal. IPD doesn't really relate to IPD as we know it, but to world scale. I've measured this to be accurate at a value of 64. Turn off bloom effect as it can conflict with QuadViews, and possibly most importantly, ensure that use QuadViews and eye tracking are both enabled. Okay, let's do this. I find with my 13900KF, DDR5 RAM and my 5090, I hover around 80 frames per second on or near the ground and peg out at 90 frames per second when I'm above 1000 feet. There is no stuttering that I can notice, even if I am flying over conurbations in the Marianas Islands, looking at the buildings while low to the ground, and that was always an Achilles heel. One last tip. If your Crystal is suffering head tracking issues, take a piece of black electrical tape and place a small square over one of the lower inside-out tracking camera lenses, and that will immediately eliminate the issue. Pimax are aware of the bug, which is software related, and are working on a fix. I hope this settings guide gets you somewhere in the ballpark of where you want to be with your Super or OG Crystal with DCS. If you have any other tips or tricks, Please remember to hit like and drop a comment in the section below with your system specs and what settings you went for and what you managed to achieve performance-wise. Until next time, wingmen.